podcast that we are now into the third hour on. Bruce Fein, who is Ron Paul campaign's senior policy advisor, will be joining us on the campaign, the latest police state developments, all these wars coming up. It's all coming up after the quick break. Stay with us. More of the info war straight ahead. Okay, we are now 8 minutes into the final hour of this worldwide broadcast. Of course, I'll also be back this evening, 7 o'clock, with the InfoWars Nightly News. Coming up the next few days, I'm going to be able to air the big hour-and-a-half interview I did, taped with Dave Mustaine of Megadeth. Politics, Metallica, everything. He talked about stuff he's never talked about before. And he hadn't done an interview in a while, in a few weeks, because they took it out of context that he was endorsing Santorum. He put a press release out saying that's not what I did, and wanted it retracted, and they never really did that. So he also talked about that in the interview. He says he likes Ron Paul. He just doesn't fully get the foreign policy. And some of the media, you know, did things like imply that, well, Ron Paul says we're like the Taliban. So people really get concerned about the military situation. I want to raise that first with Bruce Fein, who we're very thankful for joining us in his busy schedule. Senior policy advisor to Ron Paul 2012 campaign. Of course, to go over his bio would take a while, but it's important to. Bruce Fein specializes in constitutional and international law. He's a frequent witness before Congress and is a regular guest on national television and radio. He is chairman of the American Freedom Agenda, founder of Bruce Fein and Associates, Inc., and the Litchfield Group, author of Constitutional Peril, the life and death struggle of our Constitution and democracy, a weekly columnist for the Washington Times. Mr. Fein graduated with honors from Harvard Law School in '72, clerked for the prestigious federal court, served as special assistant to the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel and the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust. He was involved in some big antitrust cases, Assistant Director of the Office of Legal Policy, Associate Deputy Attorney General, General Counsel of the Federal Communications Commission, Counsel of the Joint Congressional Committee on Covert Arms Sales to Iran, Visiting Fellow for Constitutional Studies for the Heritage Foundation, Adjunct Scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and Guest Lecturer at the Brookings Institute, to name just a few. But he's Ron Paul's chief policy advisor. That tells you a lot. The campaign is going great. He won some states, clearly, Iowa and Maine, and there was fraud there, and now they're trying the same old tricks, but he's winning by injecting real issues. But continuing with the foreign policy, I see the former head of the Mossad saying don't attack Iran. I see most of the generals, the last two Joint Chiefs of Staff chairmen, say don't do it. But then when Ron Paul goes with even what the CIA is saying about this isn't a good idea, he's the bad guy. So how is the minority view the majority view with Romney and Santorum and Gingrich, and then how is Ron Paul bad, Bruce, because he's actually a scholar and informed? Can perhaps you can tell us why you think that's the case?
Well, it's my book, American Empire Before the Fall. It's recently published by Campaign for Liberty, which describes what I style the psychology of empire. Even if it's a minority view and the majority of Americans are not out on the streets marching to say invade Iran, we can't tolerate a nuclear-capable Iran, even though we can, a nuclear-capable Pakistan, a nuclear-armed India or North Korea. But it is this psychology of empire that sort of pervaded our elite, if you will. And Ron Paul, you correctly identify as someone who's expressing the majority viewpoint. And I want to underscore this total media misrepresentation of Ron Paul's stance on foreign policy. When it comes to being a hawk on defending Americans on American soil, Ron Paul is the biggest hawk of all. He doesn't believe, however, that we should be squandering our defense resources on defending other countries or other peoples. That's for humanitarians or their other countries to do. And we're spending trillions of dollars and wasting lives and limb of Americans for other people's liberty, even assuming that our motives are altruistic. And take, for example, the situation in Iran. Remember, probably, Alex, you and I lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. We know nuclear deterrence works. We know it doesn't matter how power-hungry you are. No country has ever craved nuclear incineration. And we could totally, and we should threaten any country who would attack us with nuclear weapons or non-nuclear weapons with incineration if they're going to be the aggressor. And that kind of threat and deterrent works. It's worked every single year throughout the Cold War. There's no indication that somehow, for the first time in 4,000 years, Iranian rulers they covet, destruction. If they wanted that, they could jump into the Tigris and Euphrates tomorrow and drown themselves to visit their alleged 77 virgins in heaven.
Well, haven't the Iranians shown the opposite, extremely wily, extremely cunning?
Yeah, absolutely. They display all the earmarks of realpolitik, including negotiating, an end to the Iran-Iraq war. They didn't choose Armageddon. When we shot down the USS Vincennes, we shot down an airliner over the Persian Gulf, killed almost 300. And then there was negotiations for reparations. The Iranians didn't say, aha, now we're going to launch a nuclear attack on the United States, even if it could be done, given the problem of delivery vehicles going that far. And then it said, well, but they might attack Israel. Yeah, that's Israel's problem, not ours. And we should authorize, Israel's got to do, every country has a right of self-preservation.
Ron Paul has said Israel has 400 nuclear weapons, high-tech system. I mean, Iran would commit suicide if they did that.
Absolutely, and they've never tried to do anything like that, before. The Iranians are not in Jerusalem. The Iranians are not in Tel Aviv. The Iranians are not stupid. And historically as well, Alex, Iran has not been hostile to Israel. If you think about its birth, 1948, the only country in the Middle East that did not declare war on Israel was Iran. So there isn't any kind of megalomania and messianic fanaticism about destroying Israel. And there's no reason why Israel's deterrent wouldn't work just like ours. They clearly have a more formidable nuclear arsenal that you've identified. And why would Iran and its leaders who covet the exercise of power, do something that would invite destruction? Even the North Koreans, they're probably even crazier than the Iranians with regard to their fanatical control on their population, have not launched nuclear weapons against any other country. And I say deterrence works. And moreover, if deterrence is cast aside, Alex, there's no stopping point. Then we could go into any country in the world and say, we're bombing you because we don't think that you ought to have a nuclear capability at some time.
Well, there you go, Professor, constitutional lawyer Bruce Fein. That's exactly what they say in the NDAA. Break that down, because first Obama says he's not going to sign it. Then we learn he demanded it. Then he does sign it. And now he comes out and says, don't worry, I won't use it. But suddenly the Attorney General says, but I will kill citizens overseas. And, well, maybe we'll secret arrest people. So it's the classic tactic of advancing when there's pressure, retreating, and then as soon as the dust settles, advancing and then launching the war in Libya without congressional approval. I mean, it is really scary.
It is. And think where we've gone from Libya. The discussion right now on attacking Iran, it's all assumed, contrary to the Constitution, that the president alone will decide. He's talking to AIPAC. He'd make these speeches saying, well, I will decide it's not going to be containment, it's going to be something else. Really? The Constitution says Congress makes that decision. And so he usurps the power of Congress without blinking an eye. And what's equally stunning, Alex, is Congress there accepts it. There's no articles of impeachment saying, no, the most important power we exercise is the decision to whether to go to war or not, whether we're going to have our men and women risk that last full measure of devotion for somebody else's liberty. And the president usurps the power, and Congress doesn't even utter a peep. It's truly stunning. I lived and worked through the Nixon impeachment hearings, in 1973 and 74. And what he did is almost a tea party compared to the sacrilege of the Constitution that goes on daily right now in the White House.
So how do we break the hoax, Bruce, that Ron Paul is a strange bird when it comes to defense of this country when, as you just stated, look, most of the Israeli experts, that's not a secret. In the Israeli press, they admit most of their military saying don't attack Iran because it'll make Israel look like the bad guy. Israel will be attacked on all sides. Oil prices will explode. You've already got 400,000 Israelis out, a few months ago protesting their economy. Why do you think Netanyahu and others are creeping towards it?
Well, the Israel, in some sense, Alex, is a microcosm of our own empire psychology. And it's something that's not flattering about human nature, but there are mentalities that get a thrill. They get sort of gratified out of being the bully on the playground. And even when you have the highest levels of Mossad saying Iran is not an existential threat to Israel, Israel sort of feels, well, this is our manhood, if you will. We're not going to permit the Holocaust again. And so everybody gets their adrenaline pumping. And it's a very juvenile and infantile attitude to have when, the people's lives are at stake in huge numbers. And that's, I think, what we're witnessing in Israel. It's like every time you get an entity with unchecked power, it then becomes arrogant and then finds kind of adolescent thrill over asserting its power and being a bully there.
Yes.
But it sounds simplistic, but in fact, that's what's going on. I mean, nobody in your audience, Alex, has ever woken up and worried that Iran was going to have a nuclear weapon come down on their city. I mean, in fact, no one in their daily life makes any decision based on a fear that Iran will use nuclear weapons against the United States. And yet here we are as a country suggesting, my gosh, it's just around the corner and we got a bomb and another $100 billion and risk all the wrath of the Middle East in order to prevent a nuclear capability from arising in Iran.
But that's what, like 95%, literally, because I read the papers constantly, almost all the experts say, almost no threat from Iran. But if you attack them, then Israel really is going to be in trouble.
Yeah, of course they will, because it's natural to seek retaliation when you're brutalized by an aggressor. We do the same thing. And that's what to me seems so astonishing, is this idea that human nature is different in Iran than in the United States, and they'll just accept our attack and then surrender and say, okay, you tell us how you want us to reconstruct our government, we'll abandon nuclear weapons. I mean, that's truly living in fantasy land, utter fantasy land. The same thing we're doing in Afghanistan and we're trying to do in Vietnam as well. And this is where I think we've totally lost our way in the world as a republic. We got to remember we are totally entitled to defend ourselves and to incinerate anybody who attacks. But hey, United States, blessings of liberty are about blessings of liberty for Americans. And we like our example to influence events abroad, but we fight only to protect.
Stay there. We're going to come right back and get into the campaign itself and how you're advising Ron Paul. Stay with us. We'll be back. A little over. We are back live. Thank you so much for joining us. Before he leaves us, we'll tell you about his latest book. In fact, we'll put it on screen right now. American Empire Before the Fall. And I want to talk to Bruce before he leaves us about what he sees that fall looking like. Now, if you've got questions for the chief policy advisor for Ron Paul, so we can get to 4 or 5 calls at least, please just have a quick question or comment. We'll go to your calls here in about 10, 15 minutes because we do have him for most of the hour. The toll-free number to join us is 800-259-9231, 800-259-9231. Okay, Bruce, you're there. You're helping the campaign, advising, which really shows how much Ron Paul respects you. Where do you see the campaign going right now?
Well, I think the effort is to assemble as large a delegate count as we can, keep the message pure and straight. You'll notice that he was the only one who didn't use euphemisms to describe the rather harsh language Rush Limbaugh had used to sort of debase political debate. And Ron is out there for the message. He's not out there as a megalomaniac, egomaniac, just trying to, build a brand that he can then capitalize on making speeches. And so I think he's working at the caucus level and with the contributions, making clear that he's in this all the way through August. So it may well be that at that time he would have the delegate number that could used as bargaining to push the other nominees over the top with a majority. I think, Alex, there's a substantial likelihood that none of the 4 remaining contenders will arrive in Tampa in August with a majority of delegates, because the majority of states are not winner-take-all states, but proportional representation. So there's a substantial splintering of the delegates in all of these primaries, and that's why even today, Romney at the head of the pack has got less than 200 delegates. And that's towards a total of 1,144 needed for a majority. So,
sure.
He's less than 10% of the way there. And Ron, I think, is very, very scrupulous, indefatigable in campaigning in some of the smaller states where the caucus there will be important in delegate
In fact,
selection.
he's set right now. They don't steal it again. All the polls show to win Idaho. Undoubtedly, he won Maine, and they've admitted all the counties where he was winning big. They just didn't count them. There was clearly a lot of chicanery going on in Iowa. And people say, well, then why get behind him if it's fraud?